Hi Reddit, throwaway account for obvious reasons. I never thought I'd be one of those people writing on here, but I'm at a loss and need some advice. So, here goes. I'm Matt, 36, married to Jessica, 34. We've been together for 10 years, married for 7. On the surface, we were the picture-perfect couple. Friends and family constantly gushed over how in sync we seemed, how much we completed each other. And for a while it felt that way, at least to me. Over the last 6 months, though, things changed. Jessica started acting different. She'd always been outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly be the center of attention. But lately, she's been spending less time at home and more time working late or meeting up with friends. Her phone, which used to be casually left on the counter, is now glued to her hand. She's got a password on it, something she never felt the need for before. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying it was because of work stuff. I try to push the doubts aside. Jessica has always had this fiery, independent streak, and I didn't want to come off as the overbearing husband. But something fell off, like a splinter lodged deep under my skin. And then last Friday happened, the night that shook everything loose. To give some context, Fridays used to be our night. We'd cook dinner together, open a bottle of wine, and just enjoy each other's company. But for the past few months, Jessica has had book club on Fridays. I didn't think much of it until last week when one of her book club friends, Emily, happened to call me about a work-related favor. During the conversation, I casually mentioned how much Jessica loved their Friday meetups, and Emily went silent. Like, dead silent. Then she said, Matt, we haven't had book club in over a year. Jessica stopped coming ages ago. I'm pretty sure my heart stopped for a second. I managed to mumble some excuse about being confused and ended the call quickly. I sat there, staring at my phone, trying to piece together what this meant. I wanted to believe there was some reasonable explanation, but deep down I knew. The woman I've shared a decade of my life with has been lying to me. And if she lied about this, what else was she hiding? After that conversation with Emily, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. Every time Jessica's book club came up in the past, she'd seemed so casual about it. Too casual, now that I thought about it. I started wondering if there had been other signs I missed, other clues that should have tipped me off sooner. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jessica came home late, as usual, and I pretended to be asleep as she quietly slipped into bed. I could smell perfume. Not hers, but something sharp and floral. My stomach churned. The next day, while Jessica was in the shower, I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do. I looked through her phone. She'd changed the password since the last time I'd seen her unlock it, but it only took a couple of guesses before I figured it out. Her birthday? Too obvious. The day we got married? Bingo. I scrolled through her messages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Most of her texts were normal, chats with coworkers, a group thread with her family. But then I saw a thread with someone named Chris. No last name, just a first name and a string of heart emojis next to it. The messages were explicit. There were texts about meeting up, about how much she missed him, about things she couldn't wait to do the next time they saw each other. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My vision blurred, and I had to sit down to keep from falling over. The worst part? The text confirmed that her book club nights weren't the only time she'd been seeing him. There were messages about lunches, quick visits, even times when I'd been home but thought she was out running errands. She'd been lying to my face for months, maybe longer. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and left the house. I needed to clear my head to figure out what the hell I was going to do. After a few hours of driving aimlessly around town, I finally worked up the courage to go back home. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to say to Jessica, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. The longer I waited, the angrier I got, and I needed answers. When I walked in, Jessica was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. The sight of her, so calm and collected, made my blood boil. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, trying to decide how to start. Finally, I said, "Hey, we need to talk." She looked up, startled by the tone in my voice. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her phone down. I couldn't hold back. "I know about Chris." Her face went pale. For a second, she looked like she might deny it. But then her expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" Don't play dumb, Jessica. I saw the messages. I know about your little book club lie. How long has this been going on? She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, like she was trying to figure out the best way to spin this. It's not what you think, she finally said. Chris is just a friend. We've been talking, that's all. It's harmless. Harmless. I snapped. Jessica, I read the messages. Don't insult my intelligence. This isn't just talking. You've been sneaking around behind my back for months. Do you even realize what you've done to me? To us? She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from defensive to downright dismissive. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to find excitement elsewhere. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. Do you know how dull it's been, Matt? You come home, we have the same conversations, eat the same meals, and do the same boring things. Chris makes me feel alive. I'm sorry if that's hard for you to hear, but it's the truth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was she unapologetic, but she was blaming me for her cheating. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides as I struggled to keep my voice steady. You don't get to shift the blame onto me. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me, not run off to someone else. She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, I don't want to fight about this right now. I need some space to think. Space? I echoed, incredulous. You've had plenty of space with Chris. She grabbed her phone and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, seething with rage and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I knew it wouldn't help. Instead, I sat down and started to think about what I was going to do next. That Jessica's words replayed in my head long after she walked out of the room. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to find excitement elsewhere. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the sheer callousness of her response. I thought we had something real, something worth fighting for, but clearly she'd already decided otherwise. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the house, alternating between anger and sadness. The evidence was undeniable, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. I started questioning everything. Were there other guys? How long had she been checked out of our marriage? Was it all just a lie? By midnight, Jessica still hadn't come back downstairs. I debated confronting her again, but the truth was, I didn't think I could handle another one of her biting remarks. Instead, I decided to sleep in the guest room. I couldn't bear to share the same bed with her. Not after everything I discovered. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe Jessica had come to her senses, that she'd realized how much damage she'd done and wanted to make things right. But when I walked into the kitchen, the sight that greeted me was anything but conciliatory. There she was, dressed to the nines, scrolling through her phone with a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up briefly when I entered but didn't say a word. The air between us was thick with tension. Going somewhere? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. Yeah, she replied casually, like this was any other day. I have plans. Plans. I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. With Chris. She didn't even flinch. I don't think that's any of your business. That was it. The dam broke. Not my business? You're my wife, Jessica. You don't get to sneak around with some guy and then act like I'm the one overstepping boundaries. What the hell is wrong with you? She rolled her eyes and set her coffee down. You're being dramatic. I told you I need space, Matt. Maybe you should use this time to figure out why you're so controlling. Controlling. That word lit a fire in me. I'd given her everything, trust, support, love, and now I was being painted as the bad guy. But before I could respond, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll be back later, she said without looking back. As the door slammed shut, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. Anger, despair, humiliation. It all swirled together into a storm I wasn't sure how to weather. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, until it hit me. I had a choice to make. I could keep letting Jessica dictate the narrative, or I could take back control of my life. I didn't know what the next step would be, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. Jessica's departure that morning left a silence in the house, so thick it was suffocating. I stood frozen in the kitchen for what felt like hours, the smell of her coffee lingering like a cruel reminder of the life I thought we had. But the more I replayed our arguments in my head, the more one thing became clear. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal. I was dealing with someone who had no remorse, no sense of accountability, and no respect for the life we'd built together. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. I started cleaning the house, not because it needed it, but because I needed to do something to distract myself. As I scrubbed countertops and vacuumed floors, my thoughts shifted from heartbreak to resolve. I had spent the past decade bending over backward to make Jessica happy. I wasn't going to let her destroy me now. Around 5 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." The sheer audacity of it made me laugh bitterly. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. I decided to take action. First, I called my best friend, Mike. We hadn't talked much lately. Life and marriage had gotten in the way, but I needed someone who could give me a reality check. Mike answered on the second ring. "Matt? Long time, man. What's up?" The moment I heard his voice, the dam broke. I told him everything. The late nights, the book club lie, the text from Chris, the confrontation, and Jessica's cold indifference. By the time I finished, I was pacing the living room like a caged animal. "Jesus, Matt," Mike said after a long pause. "I don't even know what to say. That's brutal." "Yeah," I said, collapsing onto the couch. "It is. I feel like an idiot for not seeing it sooner." "Don't do that," Mike said firmly. "This isn't on you. She's the one who chose to lie and cheat. But you can't keep letting her treat you like this. You gotta draw a line, man." His words hit me like a slap in the face. He was right. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for Jessica to decide whether or not our marriage was worth saving. I needed to take control. "Thanks, Mike," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. I needed to hear that. "No problem," he said. "And hey, if you need a place to crash or someone to back you up, you know I've got your back." After hanging up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let Jessica's actions define me or our future. I spent the rest of the evening making preparations. I gathered copies of all our financial documents, changed the passwords on my personal accounts, and even started looking up divorce lawyers online. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet, but I wanted to be prepared. Around midnight, I heard Jessica's car pull into the driveway. My heart raced as I waited for her to come inside. When she finally walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me still awake. "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She shrugged and headed for the stairs without a word. The sight of her so nonchalant, so utterly unaffected by the chaos she'd caused, made my blood boil. "Jessica," I called out, my voice firm. She stopped halfway up the stairs and turned to look at me. "We need to talk. Now." She sighed dramatically and came back down, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "What is it, Matt?" "I'm tired." I stared at her, trying to find a trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But all I saw was someone who didn't care. "This isn't working," I said. "You're not even trying. You're still seeing him, aren't you?" Her eyes narrowed. "I told you I need space. And I told you I'm not okay with this." I shot back. "If you want to be with Chris, just say it. But don't stand here and act like I'm the problem." Jessica crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Maybe I wouldn't have needed Chris if you weren't so suffocating." Did you ever think about that? It felt like a slap to the face. "Suffocating?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're blaming me for your affair? Do you even hear yourself?" She rolled her eyes and turned to leave, but I wasn't done. "Jessica, stop. You don't get to walk away from this conversation. If you want out of this marriage, just say it. But if you want to stay, then you need to cut him off and start being honest." She paused at the foot of the stairs, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she might actually take responsibility, that she might say something to salvage what was left of us. But instead, she said, "I don't owe you an explanation." That was it, the final nail in the coffin. As she walked upstairs and closed the bedroom door, I sat down on the couch, my hands trembling. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of clarity and dread. The decision I had made the night before, calling a divorce lawyer, felt right, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. After 10 years with Jessica, I was staring down the end of everything we'd built together. But then again, what had we really built if she could treat me like this? Jessica was already gone when I came downstairs. Her absence didn't surprise me. It was becoming her routine. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I had bookmarked a few law firms the night before, but the idea of actually making the call felt daunting. What would I even say? Hi, my wife is cheating on me, and I think it's time to end my marriage? Eventually, I worked up the courage. I called the first number on my list and was greeted by a friendly receptionist. I explained my situation as briefly as I could without choking up, and she scheduled a consultation with one of their attorneys for later that week. Hanging up the phone felt like both a weight off my shoulders and a stone sinking in my gut. When Jessica came home that evening, she was on her phone, laughing at something. The sound of her carefree laughter made my stomach churn. How could she be so oblivious? Or worse, so indifferent to the pain she'd caused? Hey, I said as she walked in, my voice steady but firm. She glanced up, her expression instantly guarded. What now, Matt? We need to talk. I motioned toward the living room. Sit down. Jessica sighed dramatically, but complied, sinking into the armchair opposite me. She crossed her legs and folded her arms, looking like she couldn't wait for this conversation to be over. I called a lawyer today, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely shocked. You what? I called a divorce lawyer, I repeated. I'm done, Jessica. I've spent the last few days trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out if there's anything left to salvage. But it's clear you've already made your choice. Her shock quickly morphed into anger. Oh, so that's it? You're just giving up? I laughed bitterly. I'm giving up? You've been sneaking around with Chris for months, lying to my face, and blaming me for your affair. And you have the nerve to call me a quitter. Jessica rolled her eyes. God, you're so dramatic. It's not like I was planning to leave you. Chris and I, what we have, it's not serious. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Not serious? I snapped. You've been lying, cheating, and gaslighting me, and you think that's not serious? Do you even hear yourself, Jessica? She stood up, towering over me, her arms flailing in frustration. Fine, maybe I am a terrible person, okay? Maybe I'm selfish. But don't act like you're perfect, Matt. You're boring, predictable, and you don't even try to make me happy anymore. Her words cut deeper than I cared to admit, but I refused to let her see it. I stood up too, meeting her gaze head on. If I'm so terrible, why are you still here? Why don't you just leave? Her face softened, but only for a moment. Because I wanted to fix this, Matt. I wanted us to get through this, but you're the one throwing in the towel. I laughed bitterly. Fix this? Jessica, you haven't done a single thing to fix this. You're still seeing him, still lying, and still blaming me for your mistakes. You're not trying to fix anything. You're just trying to have it both ways. She stared at me, her mouth opening like she was about to argue, but no words came out. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. You know what? Fine. Do whatever you want, Matt. I don't care anymore. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing there, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over, not just the argument, but the entire charade. She made it clear where she stood, and now I knew exactly where I stood too. I wasn't going to let her drag me down anymore. After Jessica stormed out, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever, but for the first time, it didn't bother me. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty or dread. It was the calm after a storm. I'd finally drawn my line in the sand, and whether Jessica liked it or not, I was moving forward. Still, the thought of everything falling apart weighed on me. I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing a decade of memories, plans, and dreams. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those dreams had been one-sided for a long time. Jessica hadn't been part of them in any meaningful way for months, maybe even years. The next morning, I called my sister, Lauren. She and I weren't particularly close, but she was someone I trusted to give me a no-nonsense perspective. Hey, Matt, she said when she picked up. What's going on? You sound tense. Yeah, it's been a rough few days, I admitted. I don't even know where to start. Try me, she said, her voice softening. I told her everything, the lies, the messages, the fights, and my decision to contact a lawyer. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Matt, Lauren finally said, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But honestly, it sounds like you're doing the right thing. Jessica clearly doesn't respect you or your marriage. You deserve better. I keep thinking maybe I should have seen this coming, I said. Like, maybe if I'd paid more attention, I could have stopped it. Don't do that to yourself, she said firmly. This isn't your fault. She made her choices, and now you're making yours. You got to focus on what's best for you. Her words hit me hard. For so long, I've been stuck in a cycle of trying to fix things, trying to make Jessica happy, try to hold on to what we had. But Lauren was right. I needed to start focusing on myself. That afternoon, I got a call from the lawyer's office confirming my consultation appointment. It was scheduled for 2 days later, and while the thought of walking into a law firm to discuss the end of my marriage felt surreal, I knew it was necessary. Jessica came home late again that night. She barely looked at me as she walked in, heading straight for the stairs. But this time, I didn't feel the usual rush of anger or sadness. Instead, I felt indifferent. It was as if a switch had flipped. I no longer cared what excuses she had or where she'd been. I was done trying to understand her, done trying to make things work. As I sat in the quiet living room, I started making a list of the things I needed to take care of, canceling our joint accounts, figuring out what to do with the house, and deciding how to break the news to friends and family. It felt overwhelming, but it also felt like progress. The next day, something unexpected happened. I got a text from an unknown number. Matt, this is Chris. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What the hell did he want? For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I typed back, "What do you want?" His response came almost immediately. "I think you deserve to know the truth about what's been going on." The audacity of it made me laugh bitterly. The truth? I thought. Wasn't it a little late for that? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. If nothing else, I wanted to hear what kind of story he had to tell. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop that evening. When I walked into the cafe, Chris was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked exactly how I'd imagined, mid-30s, well-dressed, and oozing confidence. As I approached, he stood up and extended his hand. I didn't take it. "Let's just get this over with," I said, sitting down. Chris sighed and leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table. "Look, Matt, I know this situation sucks, and I'm not here to make excuses. But I think you should know that Jessica hasn't been honest with either of us." I narrowed my eyes. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" He hesitated, then said, "She told me you two were separated, that you were just living together for financial reasons." My jaw clenched. "That's a lie. I figured that out eventually," he said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. But by the time I realized, things had already gotten complicated. Complicated, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean you slept with my wife?" Chris flinched but didn't deny it. "Yeah, and I'm not proud of it. But if it's any consolation, it's over." I told her I couldn't keep doing this. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "So, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I didn't know the full story until recently," he said. "And I think you deserve to know the truth. Jessica's been playing both of us." His words hit me like a truck. As much as I wanted to hate him, and I did, part of me couldn't help but believe him. Jessica's lies had already been exposed in so many ways. Why wouldn't she lie to him too? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Thanks for the insight," I said coldly. "But I've heard enough." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. Chris's words didn't fix anything, but they reinforced what I already knew. Jessica wasn't the person I thought she was, and I couldn't let her drag me down any further. As I drove home from the cafe, Chris's words replayed in my head. I'd always thought of him as the villain in this story, but now I saw the bigger picture. Jessica wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to everyone. It didn't excuse what Chris had done, but it gave me a strange sense of clarity. Jessica's betrayal wasn't about me, or Chris, or anyone else. It was about her. When I got home, the house was dark. Jessica's car was in the driveway, but the silence told me she'd already gone to bed. I sat on the couch, staring into the empty living room, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger or despair. I felt free. The next morning, Jessica came downstairs as I was making coffee. She looked at me warily, like she could sense that something had shifted. "Morning," she said, her tone cautious. "Morning," I replied, handing her a cup of coffee. She took it but didn't sit down, hovering by the counter instead. "About last night," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I don't want to hear it." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't even know what I was going to say." "I don't care," I said. "Whatever excuse or half-truth you're about to give me, it doesn't matter anymore. I've already made my decision." Jessica set the coffee cup down with a loud clink. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done," I said. "I've got a consultation with a lawyer tomorrow, and I've already started making plans to move forward without you." Her face flushed with anger. "So, that's it? You're just going to throw everything away?" I laughed bitterly. "Throw everything away? Jessica, you already did that. I've been trying to hold this together, trying to figure out if there's anything left to save, but you've made it clear where you stand. I'm just catching up." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not doing this anymore, Jessica. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, and the blame. You can keep playing games if you want, but I won't be part of them." For a moment, she looked like she might fight back, but then something shifted in her expression. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long breath. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's what you want." "It's not about what I want," I said. "It's about what I deserve." That afternoon, I started packing up my things. I didn't know how long the divorce process would take, but I knew I needed space, physically and emotionally. I called Mike, who immediately offered me a place to stay until I figured out my next steps. By the time Jessica came home that evening, I had 2 suitcases by the door. She stopped in her tracks when she saw them, her face a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. "Regret? Doubt?" "It didn't matter." "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "For now," I said. "I'll let the lawyers handle the rest." She didn't say anything, just stood there as I grabbed my bags and walked out the door. I didn't look back. Moving into Mike's guest room was surreal. It felt strange to be away from the home I'd shared with Jessica, but it also felt like a fresh start. Over the next few days, I focused on setting up a new routine: work, exercise, reconnecting with friends. The emptiness I'd felt in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal began to fade, replaced by a sense of possibility. The consultation with the lawyer went smoothly. They were understanding, professional, and confident about my case. By the time I left their office, I felt like I was finally in control of my life again. A week later, I got a text from Jessica. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her deal with the consequences of her actions on her own. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still clung to the good memories we'd shared, wanted to hear her out. I finally replied, "I'll meet you at the park near the house tomorrow. Noon." When I arrived at the park, Jessica was already there, sitting on a bench and looking uncharacteristically nervous. I sat down beside her, keeping a safe distance. "Thanks for coming," she said, fiddling with her hands. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, my tone even. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. "Sorry for what?" "For everything," she said, her voice breaking. "For lying, for cheating, for hurting you. I don't know why I did what I did, Matt, but I hate myself for it." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but it doesn't change what happened." "I know," she said, wiping her eyes. I needed you to know that I'm sorry, and I hope someday you can forgive me." I nodded, though I didn't trust myself to say anything more. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer. Not yet, and maybe not ever. But hearing her admit to her mistakes felt like closure, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could truly move forward. After meeting Jessica at the park, I felt a strange sense of calm. Her apology, while overdue and inadequate in the face of everything she'd done, gave me something I hadn't had since this whole mess began: closure. I didn't need to question anymore whether she understood the damage she'd caused. She did. But understanding wasn't the same as repairing, and I knew there was no path back to what we once had. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. Staying at Mike's place was temporary, but it gave me the space I needed to think clearly and plan for the future. I met with the lawyers several times, going over the logistics of dividing assets and untangling a decade of shared life. It was exhausting, but every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Jessica, for the most part, stayed quiet. We communicated only when absolutely necessary, usually via text or email, about things like the house or the divorce process. She didn't make any more attempts to meet or apologize, and I didn't expect her to. That chapter of my life was closing, and I was ready to let it go. One evening, Mike convinced me to go out for drinks. "You need to get out of your own head for a while," he said. "Come on, it'll be good for you." I reluctantly agreed, and we ended up at a low-key bar downtown. At first, I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but as the night went on, I found myself relaxing. We talked about everything except Jessica, the latest movies, work, embarrassing stories from college. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Toward the end of the night, Mike leaned over and said, "You know, Matt, this is the guy you need to be. Not the guy who let Jessica walk all over him, but the guy who knows what he deserves." I nodded, his words hitting me harder than I expected. He was right. For too long, I'd let Jessica's actions define me, but that wasn't who I was. I wasn't just Matt, the guy with the cheating wife. I was more than that. The next major step came when I decided to move out of Mike's place and into a rental apartment. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, but it was mine. Moving in felt like closing a door on the past and opening another to the future. I spent the first night unpacking and arranging furniture, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. As I settled in, I started focusing on things I'd neglected during my marriage. I took up running again, something I used to love before life got in the way. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because Jessica always claimed we were too busy. I even started volunteering at a local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. Each new experience felt like peeling back a layer of the person I'd lost over the years. Slowly but surely, I was finding myself again. Then one day I got a text from Jessica. It was short and to the point. "I'm moving out of the house. I'll leave the keys with the lawyer. Good luck with everything." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me expected to feel sadness, or maybe relief, but instead I felt nothing. The house, like our marriage, was just another thing I was ready to leave behind. I texted back, "Thank you. I wish you the best." It wasn't an emotional farewell, but it didn't need to be. We were both moving on, each in our own way. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. The process was surprisingly smooth, thanks to the lawyer's expertise and Jessica's lack of resistance. When I signed the final papers, I felt a strange combination of emotions: sadness, relief, hope, but above all, I felt free. Mike threw me a divorce party that weekend, complete with drinks, pizza, and a small group of friends. It was more low-key than it sounded, but it was exactly what I needed, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had people in my corner rooting for me. As the night wound down, one of my friends asked, "So, what's next for you, Matt?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out." The next day, I went for a long run through the park, my headphones blasting a playlist I hadn't touched in years. The air was crisp, the sun was shining, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that was enough. The days following the finalization of the divorce felt surreal. For so long, my life had revolved around Jessica, our routines, our arguments, the tangled mess of our broken marriage. But now it was just me. No drama, no second-guessing, no walking on eggshells. Just me in my small apartment figuring out what came next. The first thing I decided to do was reclaim the parts of myself I'd given up during the marriage. Jessica had always been vocal about what she thought was boring or pointless, and somewhere along the way, I'd stopped doing the things I loved. It was time to change that. I started by taking a woodworking class at a community center. It was something I'd always been curious about, but Jessica used to scoff at the idea. "What are you going to do, build a birdhouse?" she'd said once, laughing. But now I didn't care what anyone thought. I wanted to learn. The class turned out to be more rewarding than I'd imagined. Working with my hands, creating something tangible. It felt grounding, almost meditative. By the end of the 6-week course, I'd made a small coffee table that fit perfectly in my new living room. Every time I looked at it, I felt a sense of pride. It wasn't just a table. It was a symbol of my independence, of moving forward. Next, I decided to travel. Not far. Just a weekend trip to a nearby city I'd always wanted to explore, but it was a big step for me. During the marriage, Jessica had always taken control of our vacations, choosing destinations and making itineraries that suited her preferences. This time, I chose what I wanted to do. The trip was simple but perfect. I wandered through art galleries, tried hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and spent an afternoon reading in a quiet park. I even struck up a conversation with a fellow traveler at a coffee shop, something I'd never have done before. By the time I returned home, I felt like a different person, more confident, more open to possibilities. As the weeks turned into months, my life started to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. I got a promotion at work, partly because I was finally putting in the focus and energy that had been drained by the chaos of my marriage. I reconnected with my family, especially my sister Lauren, who became one of my biggest sources of support. And I started making new friends, people who knew me as Matt, not as Matt and Jessica. One of those friends, Emily, the same Emily from the book Club Lie, became an unlikely ally. After everything happened, she reached out to me, apologizing for her role in unknowingly covering for Jessica. We ended up meeting for coffee, and over time, a genuine friendship grew. She was funny, down to earth, and one of the few people who truly understood what I'd been through. One day, Emily invited me to a group hiking trip she was organizing. "It's nothing fancy," she said. "Just a few friends, some good trails, and hopefully not too many mosquito bites." I hesitated at first. I wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type, but something about the way she described it, so casual, so inviting, made me say yes. The hike turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd made in a long time. The fresh air, the sense of accomplishment when we reached the summit, the easy camaraderie of the group, it was exactly what I needed. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Not just content or relieved, but happy. By the end of the year, my life looked completely different. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Jessica was no longer a shadow hanging over me, and the anger and pain I'd felt had faded into something more manageable. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about her through mutual friends or see her name pop up on social media, but it didn't bother me. I'd let go of that chapter, and I had no intention of reopening it. Instead, I focused on the present, on the things that brought me joy, on the people who mattered, on the person I was becoming. And as I sat on my couch one evening, sipping coffee and admiring the table I'd built, I realized something. I wasn't just moving on. I was moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Life had settled into a rhythm I was proud of. My days were filled with work, hobbies, and spending time with friends and family. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living life on my own terms, not bending to meet someone else's expectations. It was a good feeling, one I didn't want to disrupt with anything complicated. And yet, complications have a way of sneaking in when you least expect them. One afternoon, Emily invited me to her place for a casual get-together. It was the kind of laid-back gathering I'd grown to appreciate, just a small group of friends, some snacks, and good conversation. When I arrived, I was greeted by her usual warm smile and a glass of wine. "Glad you could make it," she said, leading me into the living room. "There's someone I want you to meet." That someone was Sarah. Sarah was a friend of Emily's from her yoga class, petite, with dark curls and an infectious laugh. We were introduced briefly, and though I didn't think much of it at the time, we ended up sitting next to each other on the couch as the evening wore on. What started as polite small talk soon turned into something deeper. We talked about everything, our favorite books, travel stories, embarrassing childhood memories, and before I knew it, hours had passed. After that night, Sarah and I started texting. Nothing heavy, just friendly exchanges about movies or music or the occasional meme. I liked her, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything more than friendship. My last relationship had left scars I wasn't eager to reopen. But Sarah was patient. She didn't push or pry, didn't expect anything from me other than honesty. And somewhere along the way, I found myself wanting to spend more time with her. Our first real date wasn't anything fancy. We went to a small Italian restaurant Emily had recommended, followed by a walk through the city park. It was simple, easy, and surprisingly refreshing. There were no expectations, no games, no pretenses, just two people getting to know each other. As we walked, Sarah asked, "So, what made you decide to take a woodworking class?" I laughed. Honestly, it was something I'd always wanted to do, but my ex thought it was a waste of time. Sarah stopped walking and looked at me. "A waste of time? You built that table, right? The one Emily posted a picture of? That thing's amazing." Her genuine enthusiasm caught me off guard. For so long, I'd been used to my interests being dismissed or belittled. Hearing someone appreciate them, not just tolerate them, felt like a revelation. "Thanks," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "It means a lot." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah and I grew closer. She had a kindness and authenticity that made it easy to trust her, even after everything I'd been through. She never pressured me to talk about Jessica or the divorce, but when I did bring it up, she listened without judgment. She didn't try to fix me or tell me how to feel. She just let me be myself. And for the first time, I realized what a healthy relationship could look like. One evening, as we sat on my couch eating takeout, Sarah noticed the coffee table I'd built. "You know," she said, running her fingers along the smooth surface, "you could probably sell these. People would pay good money for something like this." I shrugged. "Maybe, but I mostly do it for fun." "Fun or not, you've got talent," she said, smiling. "You should think about it." Her words planted a seed. Over the next few weeks, I started toying with the idea of turning my woodworking hobby into a side business. I didn't know if it would amount to anything, but the thought of creating something tangible, something meaningful, felt exciting. As my relationship with Sarah deepened, so did my sense of purpose. She became my biggest cheerleader, encouraging me to take risks and step outside my comfort zone. With her support, I launched a small online shop for my woodworking projects. The response was better than I'd imagined, and soon I was juggling orders alongside my full-time job. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Better than good, actually. It was fulfilling. One night, as Sarah and I sat on the couch, she turned to me and said, "I'm really proud of you, you know." "For what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "For everything," she said. "For picking yourself up after everything you've been through. For building this new life for yourself. And for letting me be a part of it." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then I realized she was right. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, like one of my woodworking projects. And while the scars of the past would always be there, they didn't define me anymore. "I'm glad you're a part of it," I said, pulling her closer. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was something to look forward to, not something to fear. The weeks turned into months, and my life continued to evolve in ways I never could have imagined during the darkest days of my divorce. My woodworking side business began to take off, with orders coming in steadily through word of mouth and social media. Each project felt like a small victory, a tangible reminder of how far I'd come. Sarah became an integral part of my journey. She was there for every milestone, from the first time I shipped an out-of-state order to the day I upgraded my tiny corner workbench into a proper garage workshop. Her belief in me never wavered, and it fueled my own confidence in ways I hadn't thought possible. One evening, as we were wrapping up dinner at my apartment, Sarah surprised me with a question. "So, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" she asked, her tone light but curious. I set my fork down, considering her words. It wasn't a question I'd allowed myself to think about much, not after the way my plans with Jessica had crumbled. But now, with Sarah, the question didn't feel so daunting. "I don't know," I admitted. For the longest time, I was just trying to survive, to get through one day at a time. But now, I guess I see myself building something meaningful, whether it's my woodworking business, my relationships, or just a life I can be proud of. Sarah smiled. That's a good answer. What about you? I asked. Where do you see yourself? She hesitated for a moment, then said, honestly, I want to keep doing what makes me happy. And right now, that includes you. Her words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it didn't need to be. It was simple, honest, and exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next few months, Sarah and I grew even closer. We started spending more time at her place, a cozy apartment filled with plants and books that felt like an extension of her personality. One night, as we sat on her balcony watching the city lights, she turned to me and said, I think you should move in. The idea took me by surprise. I'd been so focused on rebuilding my independence that the thought of sharing my life with someone again felt both exciting and terrifying. I don't know, I said honestly. I mean, I love spending time with you, but I'm not sure if I'm ready. Sarah nodded, her expression understanding. That's okay. I just wanted you to know it's an option, whenever you're ready. Her patience was one of the things I admired most about her. She never rushed me, never pressured me. And over time, I found myself warming to the idea. By the time I officially moved in with Sarah, my life felt completely transformed. We worked together to merge our spaces, creating a home that reflected both of us. My woodworking projects found a place in her apartment, alongside her collection of eclectic art and vintage finds. It wasn't just about sharing a space, it was about building a life together. One evening, as we unpacked the last of my boxes, I came across a framed photo from my wedding with Jessica. I hadn't thought about it in months, and seeing it now felt like looking at a different person. What do you want to do with it? Sarah asked gently, noticing the picture in my hands. I thought about it for a moment, then placed it back in the box. I think I'll keep it, I said. Not because I miss that part of my life, but because it reminds me of how far I've come. Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I like that. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But as I stood in the home Sarah and I were building together, surrounded by the remnants of my old life and the beginnings of something new, I realized that was okay. Perfection wasn't the goal. Growth, love, and resilience were. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to face it. Whatever it might bring. Months passed, and life with Sarah felt like the fresh start I hadn't known I needed. Living together brought its own set of adjustments, but we navigated them with an ease that surprised me. There was no drama, no walking on eggshells, just two people learning how to build a life side by side. It was peaceful, fulfilling, and everything I'd once thought was impossible. My woodworking business continued to grow, and Sarah, ever the supportive partner, became my unofficial marketing manager. She helped me set up a professional website, took stunning photos of my projects, and even suggested I attend a local craft fair to showcase my work. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of putting myself out there felt daunting, but Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. You've got nothing to lose, she said one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop. Worst case, you meet some cool people and get inspired. Best case, you sell out and get a bunch of new customers. Her confidence in me was unwavering, and it gave me the push I needed to sign up. The craft fair was a game changer. I sold nearly all my pieces by the end of the day, and the feedback I received was overwhelmingly positive. One customer, a local boutique owner, even approached me about carrying my work in her store. By the time Sarah and I loaded up the car to head home, I was buzzing with excitement. I told you this would be great, she said, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. You're killing it, Matt. Her pride in me was palpable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself too. As things settled into a new rhythm, I started to notice something about Sarah. She had always been supportive and kind, but now there was a nervous energy about her, like she was holding something back. I didn't press her on it at first, figuring she'd tell me when she was ready. But one evening, as we sat on the couch, she blurted it out. Matt, there's something I need to talk to you about. Her tone was serious, and my heart skipped a beat. Okay, I said, setting my glass down. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the throw pillow in her lap. I've been offered a job. It's a great opportunity, but it's in another city. Her words hung in the air like a thundercloud. Another city? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded. It's a position I've always wanted, and the company is amazing. But I didn't want to say anything until I knew if it was even a possibility. My mind raced as I tried to process what she was saying. Things had been going so well between us, and the thought of her leaving felt like a punch to the gut. But as much as I wanted to ask her to stay, I knew I couldn't do that, not without taking away something she'd worked so hard for. When would you have to move? I asked, my voice quieter now. In a couple of months, she said. If I take it, they'd help with the relocation. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her not to go, to stay, and keep building the life we'd started together. But the other part, the part that had learned so much about love, growth, and independence over the past year, knew I couldn't hold her back. I'm proud of you, I said finally, meeting her eyes. This is a huge opportunity, and I know you'll be amazing. Her expression softened, and she reached for my hand. Thank you. That means a lot. But what about us? It was the question I'd been dreading, and I didn't have an easy answer. I don't know, I admitted, but I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try. We've come this far. I'm not ready to give up on us. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I'm not ready to give up either. Over the next few weeks, we talked about the logistics of a long-distance relationship. It wasn't ideal, but we both agreed it was worth a shot. I encouraged her to take the job, knowing it was the right decision for her, even if it meant we'd have to navigate uncharted territory. The day she left was bittersweet. I helped her pack up the last of her things, loaded them into the moving truck, and stood by as she said goodbye to our shared home. As she drove away, I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. I knew this wasn't the end of our story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test everything we'd built together. After Sarah left for her new job, the apartment felt empty in a way I hadn't anticipated. I missed the sound of her humming in the kitchen, the way she'd rearrange the bookshelves every other week, and the way she'd pull me into a spontaneous dance when her favorite song came on. But despite the distance, we were determined to make it work. Our first few weeks apart were an adjustment. We texted constantly and scheduled video calls whenever our schedules allowed. Sarah, as expected, was thriving in her new role. She sent me pictures of her new office, stories about her coworkers, and snapshots of the city she was now calling home. I loved seeing her happy, but a part of me couldn't help but miss the life we'd shared under one roof. The distance wasn't without its challenges. One evening, after a particularly long day, I realized how much I craved the simple comfort of having her near. I called her, and when she answered, I could tell she'd had a tough day too. I just wish I could be there, I said, frustration evident in my voice. Me too, she said softly. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. And we're doing okay, right? We are, I admitted. It's just hard sometimes. She nodded, and even through the screen, I could see the weight of her own feelings. I miss you, Matt, but I also know this is temporary. We'll figure it out. Her optimism was a lifeline, reminding me why we were trying so hard to make this work. We ended the call with a promise to plan a visit soon. A month later, I boarded a plane to see her. The moment I saw her waiting for me at the airport, all the distance and frustration melted away. She ran into my arms, and for the first time in weeks, everything felt right again. That weekend was perfect. We explored her new city together, laughing and holding hands as if no time had passed. She showed me her favorite spots, the cozy cafe where she liked to work, the park where she went for morning runs, the little bookstore she couldn't resist visiting every weekend. Seeing her world firsthand made me feel closer to her, and by the end of the trip, I felt more certain than ever that we could handle the distance. The visits became a regular occurrence. Sometimes I'd fly to her. Other times, she'd come back to visit me. We found a rhythm that worked for us, leaning on the foundation of trust and communication we'd built over the past year. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. In the meantime, my woodworking business continued to grow. With Sarah's encouragement, I started taking on custom projects and even launched a small Etsy shop. The work kept me busy and gave me a sense of purpose during the stretches of time when Sarah and I couldn't be together. Then one evening, everything changed. Sarah called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Matt, I have news." "What is it?" I asked, grinning at her enthusiasm. "I've been offered a promotion," she said. "It's a big step up, and they want me to head a new branch they're opening." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "Where's the branch going to be?" There was a pause, and then she said, "Here's the thing, it's in our city. I'd be moving back." For a moment, I was speechless. The thought of having her close again, of sharing a home, a life, felt almost too good to be true. "Are you serious?" I finally asked. "Completely," she said, laughing. "I haven't accepted yet because I wanted to talk to you first. But if you're okay with it, I think I'd like to come back." "Okay with it?" I said, my voice breaking into a laugh. "Sarah, this is the best news I've heard in months." The weeks leading up to her move flew by in a blur of planning and excitement. When she finally returned, it felt like everything had fallen into place. We found a new apartment together, one that reflected the life we were building, a fresh start for both of us. The first night in our new home, we sat on the floor surrounded by unpacked boxes, sharing takeout and a bottle of wine. As we talked about our plans for the future, I realized how far I'd come since the days of my marriage with Jessica. The pain, the betrayal, the self-doubt, it had all led me here to this moment with Sarah. "Do you think we'll make it?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. I reached for her hand, meeting her gaze. "I don't think we will. We've already made it through the hardest parts. The rest, it's ours to create." She smiled, leaning into me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Life with Sarah back in the same city felt like a dream come true. After months of navigating the challenges of long distance, having her close again made everything feel easier. We found joy in the little things, grocery shopping together, cooking meals, and curling up on the couch to binge-watch our favorite shows. The simple, mundane moments became the foundation of our life together, and I cherished every one of them. Moving into a new apartment together was an adventure in itself. Sarah and I spent weekends painting walls, arranging furniture, and turning the space into a reflection of both our personalities. My woodworking projects became a central theme. She insisted on using the coffee table I'd built as the centerpiece of the living room, and I made us a matching bookshelf that quickly became her favorite spot for her growing collection of novels. One evening, as we unpacked the last of the boxes, Sarah held up a framed photo. It was one we'd taken on our first hiking trip together, a candid shot of us laughing at the top of a hill, wind in our hair and joy in our faces. "This," she said, placing it on the mantel, "is where it all started." I smiled, pulling her into a hug. "And this is where it keeps growing." As the months went on, Sarah's career flourished, and my woodworking business continued to expand. With her back in town, she became more involved in helping me manage the business, handling the marketing and logistics while I focused on the creative side. We started attending craft fairs together, turning them into mini adventures where we'd meet other artisans and dream about future possibilities. One day, as we were packing up after a particularly successful fair, Sarah turned to me with a mischievous smile. "What if we open a workshop?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "A workshop?" "Yeah," she said, her eyes sparkling. "A space where you can build and maybe even teach others. You've got so much talent, Matt. Why not share it?" The idea was both exciting and terrifying. I'd always thought of woodworking as a personal passion, but the thought of turning it into something bigger, a place where I could share my skills and connect with others, was thrilling. "Let's think about it," I said, already imagining the possibilities. As we worked toward that goal, Sarah and I started talking more seriously about the future. One evening, as we walked through the park near our apartment, she brought up the topic of marriage. "Do you think you'd ever want to get married again?" she asked, her tone careful but curious. I paused, considering her question. "I think so," I said finally, "but only if it's with someone like you, someone who sees me, supports me, and makes life better just by being in it." She smiled, reaching for my hand. Good answer. The conversation lingered in my mind for weeks. I knew Sarah was the person I wanted to spend my life with, but after everything I'd been through, I wanted to make sure I was ready. I didn't want to rush things. I wanted it to be right. A few months later, on the anniversary of our first date, I took Sarah to the Italian restaurant where it all began. After dinner, we walked to the park, the same one where we talked about marriage. The night was quiet, the stars bright against the dark sky. As we reached the bench where we'd sat that night, I stopped and turned to her. My heart was pounding, but I knew this was the moment. "Sarah," I said, reaching into my pocket, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what love can be. Honest, kind, and real. I can't imagine my future without you in it." I got down on one knee and held out a small box. "Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, and tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning and anticipation. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the garden of the boutique where I now sold my woodworking pieces. Surrounded by our closest friends and family, we exchanged vows that felt like the culmination of everything we'd been through, individually and together. As we danced under the twinkling lights that evening, I couldn't help but think back to where it all started. The heartbreak, the healing, the growth, it had all led me here, to a love I never thought I'd find again. And as Sarah rested her head on my shoulder, I knew this was the beginning of the best chapter yet. Tomorrow, I would call the lawyer.